Buenos días, gracias por acompañarnos en este cuarto día de actividades de la Canvas, tercer día de actividades de la extensión del Canvas. La extensión del Canvas, como bien ya saben, es esta conversaciones y diálogos y masterclasses que buscan expandir más allá de la pantalla la discusión de las películas que proyectamos en cada edición, con una intención formativa y también de acercar en los diversos materiales a las audiencias. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos en este domingo al mediodía. Y el día de hoy comenzamos las actividades con una mesa que dedicamos a una nueva competencia. La nueva competencia Más Allá del Canvas, que nos pone muy orgullosos y contentos de poder presentar en esta ocasión. Una competencia que surge de la inquietud de poder expandir y expandir aún más la discusión y la oferta y nuestras intenciones curatoriales también. Nos habíamos dado cuenta en varias discusiones como con Claudio Sillero, el director artístico y también programador del festival, como muchas veces hay una cierta tendencia, por ejemplo, en el mundo de entender el largometraje como el medio mayor de expresión fílmica y de alguna forma oprimir el cortometraje y no entenderlos como una parte de lo mismo, un mismo quehacer, una misma, cuando menos con los mismos alcances, se podría decir. También veíamos que en el panorama nacional no había la suficiente discusión sobre ciertos tipos de cine, cines que se cuestionan, radicalizan, tratan de llevar los límites a un extremo, y que cuando se presentan como en secciones muy aparte en las cuales se les estigmatiza de alguna forma, sin ningún tipo pues de cubrirlos o de arroparlos. Creemos que una competencia es la mejor forma de respetar este tipo de cuestiones, a pesar de las cuestiones capitalistas competitivas que esto pueda conllevar. Es una forma, lo queremos ver como una forma más de interacción, en la cual con Más Allá tratamos que cineastas con unas trayectorias mucho más largas converjan con cineastas emergentes en diferentes formatos, como ya había mencionado, en diferentes géneros, diferentes aproximaciones, y que esta discusión tan plural y tan, por momentos puede parecer anárquica, sea más bien como un cóctel de emociones y sazones que nos permita seguir entendiendo desde otras perspectivas el lenguaje cinematográfico. A partir de este momento, por la cuestión de nuestros invitados y cuestiones logísticas, vamos a cambiar la conversación a inglés. De antemano pido una disculpa para quien esto pueda ser una dificultad. So, thank you so much, all of you, for joining us, to coming with us, to accepting our invitation to be part of the Beyond the Canvas competition that we're really proud to count with your films. I'm going to do a small introduction of each one of you, like really basic. If you want to add something else, please you're able to interrupt me, whatever you want. Kamal Al Jafari, the director of An Unusual Summer, was supposed to join us and be in this discussion with us. We're really sad that he couldn't join. We're hoping that he could add to the conversation later on, but he had some technical issues, unfortunately. Maybe we can still talk about a little bit about his film. I will do what I think he will say, and I will say it. No, I'm kidding. No, well, I'm gonna start alphabetically with Juan. Juan, it's part of he made her name was Europa. Su nombre es Europa will be presented still on the next week and Cinemex Insurgentes at the 8th at 3 p.m. and on Wednesday on Filming Latino for 24 hours for free. His film was premiered at the Berlinale Forum Expanded, and he made this film in collaboration with Anja Dornianen. They are both filmmakers based on Berlin. They work on the nickname by Ojoboca, and together, I'm doing the parallel translation, I'm sorry. They both practice aurorism, a method of simulation of transforming of the exterior. They are presenting his films and performances in a wide range of places and festivals all over the world. In between them, there's the Wexner Center of the Arts, Ostrix Museum, the Archive of Anthology Films Archive, sorry, Haus der Kulturen der Welt, Künstlerverein München, Ullen Center de Arte Contemporáneo, Rotterdam Film Festival, Berlinale, New York Film Festival, Visions du Real, Montreal Documentary Film Festival, Edinburgh, between others. They are both members, Anja and Juan David, of the Laboratory Labors, Berlin. Juan David, thank you so much for joining us. Juan, do you want to add something else too?
No, that's okay. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. On the other side, it's Richard Spurtnov. Richard is presenting Everything That It's Forgotten in an Instant, Todo Lo Que Se Olvida en un Instante. The film was premiered at Pete Marcel or Sheffield. Pete Marcel, right? You're mute. Sorry, Richard. We don't hear you.
So it was selected first for Sheffield, but then they couldn't screen it because of the pandemic. So okay. It had two world premieres, but the first screening was Feed Marseille.
Perfect. No, the good things about
I got two world premieres.
The good things about this horrible scenario we're living on is that you are able to have two world premieres. Thank you, Richard. The film is going to be screening on the Tuesday 6th on Filming Latino for 24 hours for free, all day long, and on next Friday on Cinemex Reforma Casa de Arte. Richard is born and raised in New York. He lives in Buenos Aires since 2002. He began his career as a visual artist in the photography field. As a photographer or DOP, he worked on God, Gold, and Glory, Syracuse, 99-92, and Parade, a series of 20 years of photos and recordings on 16 millimeters of the Gay Pride of New York. He has made a dozen of short films that have been released and screened on 30 film festivals internationally as Oberhausen, Black Maria, Torino LGTB, Mix New York City, Sanssouci. Todo Lo Que Se Olvida en un Instante is his second length film, and it has his world premiere at the Film Marcel and Sheffield. Thank you so much, Richard. And last but not least, the good Ryan Ferco is joining us. Ryan is presenting, correct me because I'm probably going to misspell it. Is Hirboyi?
Hervoy.
Look out from the tower. Thank you. And sorry for it. The film is going to be screening on Cinemex Alta Vista at 6 p.m. and at Filming Latino next Tuesday 8. Sorry. The film is a short film, so in a way, Ryan was going to be the one that was representing the 15 shorts that are screening in the competition, because as Juan David, Richard, and the good old Al Jafari that it's not with us, and they were with length films in the competition. Ryan Ferco is an artist that works mainly with films and video. Originally, he was formed as a historian in works and galleries, and he works mainly with landscapes as a main source for main source and a stable source for the narration. In Toronto, he practiced alone and in parallel a collaboration along with Paratsu Anushapur and Faraz Anushapur. His film was screened previously on TIFF, on the Wavelets competition, New York Film Festival, Projections, Biennale, and Yuklava. Thanks so much, Ryan, for joining us. One of the interesting things about the four of you that were invited, in this case, that I'm going to concentrate on you three, it's that the three films are ways, for me, are cinematographic archaeologies, in a way. You're working with memory, with the spaces, with history, and I would like to start with Ryan. Like in this description that he mentioned, the landscape as a source of a way for the narrative or the inspiring. If you can talk us a little bit about the project. And I understand that it's in the travel that you made that you start recording, and then you decide to structure this narrative.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. The film, I think, I mean, it's sort of heading in a few directions at once, and I think opens up a few questions and sort of leaves them unanswered, but is bracketed in a way by a house. So you arrive in a house and you end in that same space, and it's that the house is a home where my grandmother was living, and so is this sort of, emotional or hypothetical point of origin for me in looking from Canada, where I live, sort of backwards to it's in Croatia, on the border of Croatia and Slovenia now, but as a way to sort of address or think about former Yugoslavia as a landscape. And then this instability, I think, comes from a sort of commitment to an emotional or a subjective way of looking. So that's not necessarily based in factual information, but is based more in sort of an emotional way of thinking about a place.
This is a really good idea on an approach that I'm really interested, because this film tries to revisit history of the place, of the space, by understanding the subjective point of view, the impossibility of the objective in a way, and trying to make it all personal. And that's another thing that it's really interesting in the films that we are visiting or discussing here. And I want to throw the ball a little bit to Richard. Your archaeology, it's kind of connected in this way with the Ryan thing about the history of his family, his holidays or his trip to Croatia. But yours is more personal, in which you're a present character in it. Can you talk us a little bit about Todo lo que se olvida?
What aspect specifically? The personal, or
the personal of the archaeology of the personal will be there.
Wow. Well, I mean, really, the inspiration for the film, I pretty much all my work comes from a need to communicate. I don't go and look for subjects. Subjects seem to come to me. And really, the starting point of this film, before it was even a film, was when I became a father. And I became a father in Buenos Aires. And I was started to think about what it potentially might mean to be the father of someone, and that made me also think about what I received from my parents, specifically in this case my father, and it was interesting because I realized a lot of what I see as my identity, a lot of how I believe I am, has to do with being a Jewish New Yorker from the 70s. And being raised by a first-generation American, who, grandchild of immigrants, and that whole line of Ashkenazi Jews from Eastern Europe. And now it's interesting because I thought, well, I'm going to be raising my daughter in Buenos Aires, which I have a lot of connections with the city, but like I grew up in the city where my father grew up. And when we would go places, I think there was something that carried through, even if he didn't directly say, oh, this is where, I grew up. We would just go to his old neighborhood. I didn't even know it was his old neighborhood when I was a kid. And I thought, wow, I can't do that with my daughters. What will be their identity? And so that really became kind of the starting point, was more writing. I started writing things with the idea of writing something for my daughter, now daughters, when they were older and wanting to communicate. So the film really grew out of that writing initially. That was the starting point.
Okay. Thank you so much, Richard. And in the opposite, in a way, because the Richard's a way to relate with his film is extremely personal. And the emotional aspect, it's different, or the emotional approach is distinct from the Ryan's one. Even they're both the family issues that are rising there. But in Juan David film, and her name was Europa, the archaeology comes from another place. It's this idea of this, adventure that you propose to yourself between you and Anya to make a cinematic reconstruction of this history you heard, you discover about this ideological animal, maybe will be the right term. I don't know how to put it in words, because it's a really complex story behind that. So if you want to tell us a little bit about this conception of it.
Sure. The film is trying to, like you said, reconstruct a kind of, or create a sort of portrait of an animal that is extinct, which was the aurochs. This is like the ancestor of the traditional cow. And starting in the 20th century, some groups, there were some sort of efforts to bring back this animal from extinction. This was an animal that was made extinct by humans because of human intervention, domestication, and so on. And the story that we start with is an effort by two zoologist brothers, Lutz, what's his name? The brothers. The main brothers, Lutz Heck, who was the head of the Berlin Zoo, and their effort to breed back this extinct animal, supported by the Nazi regime, basically basing it on this ideology of pristine Aryan nature that could be brought back to Europe. And in their perspective, these sort of animals that were native to Europe should also return. And that was the story we learned at first. And then we found out that the descendants of those animals, which were bred by the brothers Heck, still existed in Germany, and they're called Heck cattle. And we decided to go and visit a herd of Heck cattle and see this animal. And that kind of led us on a journey to kind of find other projects that are ongoing now that are also trying to breed back this animal. So that's kind of the historical part of these first projects, and then the current ones, and a sort of comparison between them.
In this case, I will, just to force the connection, do you think that there's any personal aspect involved in the film between, like, in Anya and yours, or it was just this, that you were amazed by this idea that came up to you and you decided it has to be part of a project?
It's personal in the sense that in the film we kind of highlight our own process, like going through this whole kind of process of discovery. And we invested a lot of years into it, so we knew, when we picked the project, we knew that this was something that was going to take up a big part of our life in a way. So there is that sort of ongoing commitment to it, and trying to figure out how to develop it and tell it. And then that's kind of reflected in how we tell the story, because it kind of speaks to how we were going along trying to create this portrait. But I guess it's trying to move a little bit past just like the first sort of surprise or amazement at the story, and then trying to see what it actually can give us as an experience to if you go a little bit deeper, what can we find from it.
Well, because it's interesting the way you put it, because you share the process of your experiences. It's I'm looking for the English word. Sorry. This association, in a way that it's like if you take the audience by the hand and you said, "Come and join me to this trip to God knows where," because it's like a trip to know. It's all uncertainty in the film, and I think in a way it's something that the three films managed to achieve, because the three understand the present, the history, the memory as something that's fractured, something that it's not linear, something that it's in a way anarchic. Maybe anarchic it's the wrong word, because that means that it's no direction, but it's like a curiosity from wanting to discover all the time, and the image is questioning itself continuously. Will you, now that you mentioned this aspect of the research, I would like to ask Richard, for example, the materials that you use are not all shot in the present, right? It's a mix of things that you use for shot in diverse periods. So will you consider this part of a research, in a way, intimate research of yourself and your memory and the history of your family, of the place that you live?
Well, just to give a little background, there are two kinds of footage. I guess they're all technically archival, but one of them is high 8 videos, interviews with my father in New York. So that was, I guess, a personal research in the sense that I wanted him to talk more about his history, and I wanted him to do it in the place. I felt like being in that place, I wanted him to show me, this is where we had an apartment, this is where your grandfather's store was, etc. And I also liked, I liked the idea of bringing people to places, because I think it helps memory, I think it evokes things. And then the 16 millimeter material was all shot in Buenos Aires over a course of 16 years, but very much kind of like comes out of the tradition of being a street photographer, except instead of having my old 35 millimeter camera, I had my 16 millimeter wind up. Really the research aspect was less on the personal. A lot of the research was a lot of the narrative, the voiceover that looks into historical connections between Buenos Aires and New York. And there I was interested in where these cultures are connected historically and politically, and to some extent, you know, what is this broader thing that might be an American, and I don't mean American US, I mean American like in Spanish, identity versus the US saying, you know. So I mean, one thing that I want to say, just referring, because I got to see some of the other films, and one thing that I guess I was viewing all of them was in terms of identity, and even in Her Name Was Europa, what was interesting to me was that I felt like it was almost a questioning of a pure identity. Could you really bring back an extinct animal? So I'm happy to turn this over. I thought that was an interesting question in the film. What is the identity of an animal that's no longer here that we're going to genetically bring back?
You want to?
Yeah.
Want to say something on that?
No, I think that's right. I mean, I'm sorry, Richard, I haven't seen your film. I know Ryan's film, and yeah, I think it is a little bit of this idea of kind of puzzle pieces that don't really fit correctly, and can't, in a way. It's more about, yeah, the fact that with the European question, it's kind of also questioning that, you know, the idea that there is some sort of European wilderness or European space that can be brought back to a place that it once was, but it's a place that nobody has seen. And I guess that was clear to us from the beginning, and more clear as we went along, that it was going to be very hard to kind of create. I mean, it's maybe hard for anybody to create a complete image of anything. So there's always this stuff that like remainders that go through the wayside, and probably that's what happens with ourselves when we tell our own stories.
In this case, Ryan, will you like to say something about, because your film is really political and it has a lot of questions about the European aspects too, as in a way it questions the thing about Croatian relationship with former Yugoslavia, and that I think that you can add something up there to the idea of this puzzle with missing pieces.
Yeah, I think I mean, yeah, maybe the politics explicitly within this film are a little intentionally ambiguous, I would say, but like we're sort of fluidly between Serbia, Slovenia, and Croatia, and you're somewhat located, but it's not necessarily part of the narrative that you know where you are specifically at any certain point in time, and more sort of lean into these kind of architectural spaces which evoke something has happened, some sort of conflict or decay is happening. And that sort of grounds, I mean, that's an aesthetic grounding that's happening. But then, I mean, there's themes of reincarnation and resurrection in the film. And I've seen Juan and Anya's film. I haven't seen yours, Richard, unfortunately. But I mean, there are connections there. I can see obviously in thinking about this question of I like how you call it, Juan, the puzzle pieces not really fitting, of trying to resurrect the Auk. It's called Auk. I wrote it down.
Aurochs.
Oh, Aurochs, right.
Yeah.
And in my film, we hear sort of at the center of the film in a way, Milos, who is someone I met in Belgrade, that is an amateur sort of archaeologist or a collector, and illegally, because it's not legal to have archaeological objects in your possession. They're supposed to be in state possession, but he collects these mammoth bones and is showing us the mammoth bones in this sort of way of speaking to the landscape or the place. There's an identification with the mammoth that was there, whatever, hundreds of thousands of years ago, and it creates a sort of logic or a way to identify with a place that, from my perspective and position, is a place that is a complicated one to identify with. And so he raises the idea of resurrection and DNA in the same way that Juan and Anya do, but in a sort of, from the perspective of not being an expert. And this is, those gaps are valuable to me. I think they're important.
They're super interesting in the film. You know, and now that you mentioned this, like the word resurrection, I think it's one that I would like to put on the on the table, because I kind of related with a lot of films that are in the competition, not only yours, but for example, Jafar, that it's not here with us. The film is his film that it's only using surveillance cameras footage from his father. It's an attempt to bring him back and to understand him, not only his memories, but as well the political conflict that it's in Franja de Gaza, for example. And it's again this idea that you mentioned, for you, the space, the tower, the landscape is a place that speaks to yourself. In the case of Richard, it's the cities that are so alive, so vibrant, and each corner it's full of memories for him, for his father, for his future. So, and in the other case, it's these objects that are full of only the personal aspects of each one of you, on the political ideas that are involved in there. But taking back the idea of the puzzle, I would like to throw a question that anyone is free to answer first. I don't want to point anyone at this moment that we're in confidence. No, I'm kidding. Sorry. No, but about this puzzle, that it's when you are making the structure of the puzzle, it's like editing. It's like a montage in a way. So your films are composed by different pieces. In some cases they're in the same line. In other cases they are taken from different aspects and places. So in particular, these three films, of course, all cinema is constructed in the editing room. But I think here the emotional aspect, the construction of the image, all this thinking about how you can transform something into something more political, something more personal, it has to be really, really restructured when you're front on your desk in front of the computer. I don't know, whichever editing program you use. So I would like to know about this process in each one of you, if you're able to share it with us. Please, Richard.
I'll go. No, I mean, for me, it's because I think of the four films, mine, from my point of view, even though some people would all argue these are experimental film, I feel like mine has the closest to a more traditional structure, though I work from essay rather than a narrative story. But a lot of what I do is based on maybe more trying to do film essay. And one of the things I find exciting, and I think all these films probably happened in that similar way, is how much writing is done by creating the film. I mean, I work from notes, and then I pull notes together and I try things out, but I don't tend to write a structure. I might have maybe a line. I'll think, okay, I mean, it's funny, but because my film's very bilingual, but I like to use the word eje from Spanish, like the axis, which we don't in English. I guess we'd say the thread of the film, the narrative thread, but I felt eje thematically was more the idea, and that kind of became the guide for it. But once you get into that, it literally becomes, sometimes it would be, wow, I really want to use this text here. So I would lay in a text and then I'd say, and then I'd start to look at my images and think, what images make sense with this text, either whether because they're going with it or they're going against it, or sometimes it was the other. Sometimes there were parts that would come the other way. I'd be like, wow, I really want to do something with this sequence of images, and I might have an idea of how they should be edited. And then I think, well, do I want text or do I not want text? Do I want sound? So for me, the thing that I find exciting about that kind of process as compared to what we now think of as traditional narrative cinema is the idea that when you're editing, you're not trying to match up or vary from some script. And in that sense, as a creative process, I think I don't want to be unfair to the other form of working, but there's something very dynamic in the way you're editing. And when you talk about a puzzle, I told people, I said, it's like I'm making a puzzle of something, but I don't know what it's going to look like at the end. And that's exciting to feel like you're making a puzzle and you don't even know what the thing's going to end up to be like. When I finished the film, I was like, wow, that's interesting.
No, and perfect. Any of the other guests would like to say, Richard, you're wrong. Richard, you're...
No, I think Richard's correct. Maybe in kind of as a kind of example of very similar, like I feel like kindred in that sense of the way we work is also kind of amassing material and following threads or leads, clues, and then trying to see at the end, okay, what is this thing going to be? What do we have, and what is it structured, but without really having an end point. And in that sense, the way the film came about in the end for us, it was actually became very linear in the way we gather the material, more or less, in the sense that we decided to be very clear about how we went from one place to the other, how this one encounter led us to another encounter, led us to another place, with some kind of jumps along the way, but it was kind of based on that because the story was kind of complex, we had to kind of be clear of what we were, or we wanted to be clear of what we were doing. But yeah, it's very much that idea of not wanting to know where you will end, and having kind of an open mind in the process of saying, okay, it's kind of, you're on this quest of something and you kind of follow it through, and it's intuitive, right? So at some point, okay, I think I got something. You don't really know what that is or what it will be, but you think, okay, I think this is the point. So it's hard to speak of like exactly that process, because a lot of it is just, intuition and trusting that you have what you feel you need or something.
So before Ryan starts with his dissertation, I will say in this case, you stop. You knew that the film was done at some point, like, okay, I think we have it.
Yeah, I mean, at some point also there's other limitations, right? Time, money, other people's time and money. So it's also you kind of say you have to. I mean, you can keep going with anything. You could just keep going, but at some point you have to say, okay, I think I can create some image. Knowing that it's incomplete also is helpful. Like, I know I'm not going to be definitive. That's never our intention. So yeah, you kind of get to a point where you say, usually it's some element in particular for us. Like, we found one element in particular, and that kind of completes the messed up puzzle. Like, oh, okay, that's the one we were missing, and this kind of ties the bow on it, and that's it.
Taking that, Ryan, do you have it? Okay,
I'll let Ryan go in a sec. It just reminds me of a quotation that I always do badly. And this is a shortened version, but it's a very famous quotation by the French poet Paul Valéry, who said something to the effect of, "Poems are not finished, they're abandoned." And at a certain point, you just say, "This worked." So I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Ryan, do you have that turning point in which you knew to have that one thing, and that it was your thing to abandon the film?
Yeah, abandonment. I'm not sure, but I definitely relate to both what Richard and Juan are saying. I mean, the sense of knowing when something is done, when you set out to quite an open field of possibility, is daunting and is sort of just encoded within all the work that I do. And I also work collaboratively. I mean, this film is authored by me in a particular way that's different than some of the other work. But I mean, it really relies on collaboration and is created by different people's cameras and different people's views. And so, I mean, in this case, Paris, Stu, and Faraz, who I work with, and we collaboratively, I mean, author our work together. They also were present for a lot of this time of making this work, and I really relied on their sort of, I mean, I don't know, objectivity is the wrong word, but their different experience with the landscape than mine, which is one that's sort of heavier or searching for something more personal, let's say. So I rely on their cameras and their way of moving and shooting. And then in separate trips and times over the years of slowly piecing the puzzle pieces together of this film, there's also my father, him using a camera and me relying on his image. And then the editing is the agony and the beautiful part that takes a lot of time and doesn't have a fixed duration. It took a few years, but not in a row. I would come back to it and sort of add things in and let it go for a while until something presented itself to me that felt resonant with how I experienced.
And how will you define that, the thing that's good?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's like desiring, setting up a opportunity to have enough time to wait and then to make work that can resonate with you. So it's like, I don't exactly know what this thing is going to be. I don't know how long it's going to be. I don't know what forms it's going to take. I actually don't even know if it's going to just be in the cinema or if I need it to be more expanded. But at some point, trying a lot of different things, when I can look back and see something that I feel something emotional in it, it's like, okay, I feel like this I can abandon this process now and let the work go out, and then obviously begins some different life at that moment. But
and can I ask you why particularly this project that you work as you said with Faraz and Paras too, why this one was individual? On which point it turned into your project?
Yeah, it's a good question, and one that I still think about how to answer because I think it comes down to like just at a really basic level, it comes down to editing and that I knew I wanted to sit with this material, edit it myself. And in a way that we have a way of editing that's very collaborative and can be sort of, involves space and sort of performative elements and wanted this editing process to be slower. But the process of collecting the material to still really rely on the ways that I've come to learn to make work with Paris and Faraz. So,
Okay. Yeah. And I would like to take this question to start like another conversation. Well, not another, but like you are related with the performative aspect. So when the performance is another, like the artistic creation, like it's not like a cinematographic specific one. In the case of Ojoboca is the same. There are like a multidisciplinary, not only cinematographic way of working. And with Richard, he used to work as working on subtitles and translations and things like that. So you're like a multidisciplinary people that are influenced by other kinds of working, and that allows you this to incorporate this into the cinema process. So if you want to let us know something, Ryan, that how do you think that this allows you to work different the cinematographic visions, and then we'll go on with the rest.
How to work with cinema by not
Yeah, but like being like close to like contemporary art in a way, in this process of, you know, not having one director but a collaborative group process, etc.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, it's in my bio sometimes, or I mentioned that I like studied history, which is, I think, important only in that I learned a certain way of narrating that's very rational. And I felt like once I learned to do it, that I could continue to perform that active narration rationally on seemingly anything. And so wanted to complicate that in some way, and at a certain point in time met Stu and Faraz, and our different backgrounds came together, disciplinary backgrounds came together to converge in images, and so like my work over these years has mostly been moving image, but like I mentioned, it's sometimes it needs to be wants the audience to see it from the beginning to the end. So there's the cinema, which is the best space for this, but then sometimes it needs to be blown open, be non-linear, involve spatial elements, and then you have the possibility of being in a gallery or some sort of room, I don't know, architectural space. And it's about narrative is what it comes down to. But one isn't necessarily better than the other. I mean, the work needs to find its way and find its form.
Richard, in your case, I think it's a bit obvious. For example, the presence, the way you play with the subtitles in your film to create questionings and transform the image and like make it opposite to, and as well to make fun of subtitles.
Yeah. So I'm still a subtitler because I have to pay bills. In fact, I was just subtitling something last night. Subtitling is interesting. I mean, my first experience, because growing up in the U.S., initially what you watch is all English language film, and then at a certain age, I started to become interested in foreign film. And I remember at one point, when I was just getting interested in cinema outside the U.S., lots of Kurosawa, because we like the samurais. And then that led me to the non-samurai Kurosawa work. But you would sometimes see two different prints of a film, and one would have literal translation that was sometimes very funny because it didn't work in English, and maybe it was an expression in Japanese that someone had, and then you would find more interpretive subtitles. So I became aware. And then when I moved to Buenos Aires in Argentina, they get so much US stuff, and the subtitling in Spanish is at times hysterically bad. And I live in a bilingual household, and sometimes we watch Netflix and we put on the subtitles in Spanish, and we just have a great time being like, what the hell was that? Who subtitled that? And so the whole subtitling thing, and then as I was doing subtitling and trying to do something better mostly for Argentine filmmakers, how to put it, because it's not just language in and of itself, it's language within a culture. I mean, obviously Argentine Spanish is very different from Mexican Spanish, Spanish from Spain. And so I had actually learned Spanish before. So I went through a whole process of readopting Spanish that continues to this day. And what I realized is I would translate certain scenes for the subtitles. And I thought, man, if I write what they're saying in Argentine Spanish, anyone who's reading the English and doesn't understand Spanish will think that these people having this fun dice game want to kill each other. They're playing dice, they're playing generalada, and they'll think, man, these people want to kill each other. And it's just because Argentines, when they tease each other, use much harsher language. So I had to become aware, well, I can't just translate this, I have to reinterpret the scene. And it really made me very aware of the fact of what do I, there are things I'll say in Spanish in a certain context that I would never say in English because they just culturally don't make sense. And since the film is about these, myself, my father, my children, and these language connections, the nature of the fact that there are certain things I will explain in Spanish within a certain context, I would never explain in English, or I would have to explain in English. I might want to tell something about Buenos Aires, and if I'm talking locally, I don't have to give a historical context. But in English, to someone who doesn't know the historical context, I need to explain it. And so I thought, well, okay, the subtitles is actually giving me an opportunity here. Whereas when the subtitles in English, I can write things that I don't have to say in Spanish. And then it became something fun, the kind of the tension between these two languages and narratives that are related, but have their places where they need to separate and maybe meet again. So it became an interesting way to try to draw, maybe make a bridge or two parallel roads between these cultures and these worlds of language that I live in.
Okay.
Did that make sense?
No, it makes all the sense of the world. No, that's absolutely, because at the beginning of when you're watching the film and this started happening, for me at the beginning it was like a really conceptual thing, and as the film goes flowing, it's super light and super. In a way, you manage to reach some naive, innocent points, and that makes this exercise so lovely. In a way, now that you tell the story of how they came with all these ideas, it's even more heartbreaking, heart feeling.
One of the most fun reactions, I showed my elder daughter about 12 minutes of the film, and she's obviously fully bilingual. So she's hearing one language and reading. And if you only speak one language, it's easier. It's less of a headache. You don't have to choose. And she looked at me after 3 minutes and she said, "You're a sadist."
No, I don't know if you're a sadist. I think you just like to make fun of people. No, I'm kidding. In your case, Juan David, would you like to tell us something about the process of Ojo Boca and how working in other disciplines intersects your cinematographic work?
Sure. Yeah, I think. Hearing Ryan and Richard, I think it's an element of play that's involved in that sense. In the sense that we chose like a field, this field of cinema, of film, but we were also never really interested in these like categories and limitations and structures that you have to follow in order to be recognized or this or that. And it's about having freedom. So since we are decided not to subject ourselves to certain limitations, others come along, right? But we decide to kind of adapt the game to our interests. So we never thought, okay, you have to just make these single screen narrative films or whatever, but there are all these other traditions that we found that were also doing things that were different as performance or in spaces or multi-screen or these kind of things. And it made sense to us to continue kind of playing in those fields, and within the films themselves, trying to make them not exactly fit all these categories and parameters that are usually applied. It's kind of it's an ongoing process, right? It just allows you to continue to try things if you don't really have if you don't subject yourself to certain things like profit or these types of, or big productions or huge budgets, if you accept certain limitations, you know, we work by ourselves, we shoot everything. I mean, I think it's very similar to how Richard or Ryan work, right? You kind of like reduce all this stuff around it so that you can actually be more free and in a sense, yeah, just to try things out.
I would like to take the term free, because of course the three films are full of freedom. They are like jumping into the void in a way, in their own particular way. So if you would like to talk me anything about freedom, I think we'll be really, I'll be delighted to hear you, all of you.
I'll go. Here's something ironic. So this is the first time I got full funding to do a film, because Argentina, we complain about it because there are problems, but we do have funding, like in Mexico. So we have INCA, el Instituto de Cine y Artes Audiovisuales, I think.
Yeah.
Say. And so I got funding for this film, and it's the first time I ever had a producer, because I needed someone to deal with the bureaucracy and to make me do my job. And so ironically, it actually kind of helped to have a set amount of funding and a period of time to work with, because as much as I love the freedom in a certain way, you have to start putting limits. Otherwise, you either have to be constrained by something, whether it's structurally or resources or whatever. Otherwise, there's the risk that you might not tie the thing together. So in some ways, it was funny actually. Having these constraints, of course, there were times it was killing me, and there were things I started wanting to add to the film. And for example, there was a whole section. I got very into this one history of one of the presidents of Argentina, Sarmiento, the father of public education, and has a very strong, very strong connection historically to the public education system of the U.S. And I started to get all this material. And after 3 weeks of reading and writing, I was like, oh my God, this is another film. I was like, I do not have the time to do this. So in some way that became the decision for not doing a part of the film about Sarmiento, which was fine. I said, you know what, another film will come. But it's interesting. It was like, I enjoyed the freedom, but I also realized you need something to rein you in certain ways, I think.
Yeah. In your case, Ryan, I think the film is produced too by the Ontario Council. I don't know, the blah blah blah. Sorry, the bureaucracy of the name.
It's a grant from the Canada Council for the Arts, so it's public funding.
And in a way, you relate the same way as Richard, like with the freedom and the contrast with the public funding.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, freedom. I'm like searching my brain to answer the question. It feels like almost it's like the wrong word, but it's an important one to think about here or in general. But I mean, okay, I'm fortunate to receive public funding to make this work. In that, I mean, there's bureaucracy. There's a strange process of identifying yourself in relation to a project to get some funding in Canada. But because it's an artist grant and not a film grant, I don't have to go through the process of having a producer and these sorts of things that I know other filmmakers and friends have to go through. And this is just a sort of formal line between whether it's a film and whether it's an artist project. And by it being an artist project, it actually means I don't have to account for as much of the process. It's more open as to how I choose to work. So, I mean, that's a specific context that I find myself in.
But if you think that freedom is not the right word, which one will you think it will be?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know, because I mean, there's a lot of openness. There's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of politics in receiving public funding. There's a different type of sort of, I mean, there's a certain amount of freedom you relinquish by receiving funding from in any direction. If it's private funding, you can be free in certain ways that you can't be if it's public funding. It brings up questions for me of receiving public funding from a government that I don't necessarily agree with. I mean, this is why I feel stuck on the word. And I don't think I have a good, I'm being evasive, alternative one. But I like the question, and I will continue to think about it.
Thank you. No, but I think you found it. I think openness could be the other one. I don't know if it works for this. Like not in the bureaucracy of the funding, but openness in the way you work. Like
yeah, openness. I mean,
it's probably not freedom, but it's the open mind to incorporate everything that you have, or to let out whatever you found in the way, like Sarmiento in the case of Richard. I don't know if anyone who could face this animal will do a film about it like Juan. It's the open mind that allow him to approach there. And if you want to add something about freedom, Juan?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting idea. Maybe that's what I was bringing it up. I mean, I think maybe, I don't know, I could see it more of as it's a quest more than something you obtain. But maybe it's more, in terms of motivation, or in terms of what your goals are, at least for us, is trying to find these spaces where you can be open, where you can, of course, there's a lot of limitations, political, social, cultural, but within all that, there's sort of pockets where things are happening, where things can happen, where these things can kind of bubble up. And I guess with the film is kind of what we're trying to look at, in the sense, and whether certain, because not every quest maybe, or every kind of journey, it's not guaranteed success, or it's not guaranteed that you will end up in a space that's better. You might end up in a space that's much worse. So I guess for us, it's this process that's interesting, and then how to mold this kind of filmmaking process so that it has these parameters that we can play with, that we can use, like that we have tools that are considering all the limitations, that we can kind of stand there and, like you said, have the time to look at it, have the time to think about it, have the space to go in a different direction, things like that. So that's kind of like an ongoing kind of goal for us to continue to find that kind of zone.
And I think the Beyond the Canvas competition has a lot of ongoing films that they're really based on openness in a way, not only in the way they are made, not only in the way they are constructed, but as well in how the spectator is allowed to interact and play and be an actual participant of them. And play is another word that I think it's really valuable, that when in your previous intervention, because you're not aware of this, thank God, but here in Mexico, when experimental cinema will be something impossible to do with a funding, like in the Ontario or the Inca that allows Richard to make it. And even experimental is seen in some spheres and in some places like something that it's really intellectual, and not as something that it's playful. It's something like it should be kids playing in the kindergarten, only that with 16 millimeters of Super 8 cameras. No, I don't.
So I have to jump in on this.
Okay, please.
Because really, the funding I got from was not experimental cinema. It's an interesting fund. It's a line of funding in Inca that was actually started 11 years ago because documentary filmmakers doing work, where it's just 2 or 3 of us, basically politically got together and pressured the Institute to say, you're giving funding based on 35 millimeter and maybe 16 Super 16 traditional studio system, or indie cinema, as it would have been at that time. And they said, but we can make a film with 3 people and this smaller budget, and all we need is our. So it was actually the filmmakers that created that. Even so, a lot of the work that comes out of that is really the idea, they call it the digital fund, but it was aimed at relatively traditional documentary, or form, I hate to use the word traditional, but whether it's observational cinema or interview cinema. So it was interesting because in order to get funding for my film, since I didn't know how it was going to end, I actually wrote it to some extent as a more traditional film in the funding application, if for no other reason, because one of the things I like about this funding source is actually has a group of, there are 5 associations of documentary filmmakers, and everyone sends a representative. So projects are actually judged by peers, and the criteria: is this a documentary film? And within the funding, is this person capable of doing what they say they're going to do? And so it's interesting because to some extent ideology is supposed to be off the table, and for the most part it is. But what happened was I had to write this idea in a more traditional form, in part because a lot of the filmmakers here wouldn't know it, because we have experimental filmmakers, but we don't have funding for experimental film in Inca. And one of the things I actually did in my application, which I was told no one has done before, is I put links to like works by Stan Brakhage and Jonas Mekas references for some of the visual forms, and even some links to some of my short films. So it was interesting, but I kind of was aware that I had to communicate to my peers, and a lot of them didn't know this kind of filmmaking, which is why I feel that my work almost has one foot in each camp to some extent.
No, you have to be playful in the applications too.
Yeah,
that's a lesson.
And I'm actually in 2 groups. I'm in a documentary cinema group, and those of us in the experimental cinema group are right now we're trying to think, how can we represent ourselves to the Film Institute to open that kind of funding for that kind of work?
That's super important. No, but it's a privilege from the, I was going to use the term that I hate, the first world, in a way.
Well, it's ironic. It's ironic because a friend of mine who's actually from Mexico turned to me and said, "You couldn't get that funding in the U.S. for your film."
Okay, that's true.
Get full funding to make, and it's true.
Yeah,
but then one of the fun ironies is because Argentina is in debt, and a lot of it to U.S. funds, is after I got the funding, it started being economically devalued over the course of the year that it was working. So the value of my pesos was going down, and my producer was like, "You have to finish this film before your money is worth nothing."
Okay, that was your moment when you knew that
we're colliding again.
You know that you mentioned not the devaluation, but the one having one foot here and one foot another, and some labels. I would like to ask, and I would like to start with Ryan, because you already mentioned, for example, essay film, but for us, your films are not classifiable, unclassifiable. So if I force you, being playful, to put labels on it, how will you consider the film will be, or what will it be, for example, Ryan?
Like what like words,
Label.
genres, labels?
Yeah, if you have to label.
I don't know. I think it's I think calling something an artwork catches a lot, while being a little evasive at the same time. So I will call it that.
No, my idea is to.
Or maybe I didn't understand the question.
No. Like classifying in genres or in terms or in ideas your film. I think the 3 films are impossible to classify for me.
Yeah.
We could try to put a lot of labels, like in this universe of internet, that you have to label everything, but your films, not the words are not enough, to be honest, to put exact labels in it. But you said artwork, so yeah, you win.
Yeah, I mean artwork. I mean I do think about essay. I think about essays. I write a lot. So there is essay in there. I think about documentary and issues of representation and the politics of representing. I think about history and landscapes, and I think about architecture a lot. So I mean, those are all in there, and then I can be like cheeky or cheat and call it artwork, but there's a lot of genres and methods in there for sure. Yeah.
An openness film, I would say now.
Yeah, and playfulness. Like, yeah, I think it's like that's good. That's I like that. To think about, there has to be something joyous somewhere, even if it's tackling or you're surrounding something that's not joyous. There has to be some sort of desire driving it, because there's, I mean, we talk about funding and money. There's something not inherently rational or logical about working in these ways, because we send ourselves off into certain corners of, if we're lucky enough to be programmed into festivals or galleries or whatever, they can also sort of fall into certain categories. And but there's a desire, playfulness, joyousness in there that really is what makes it go, for me at least.
Juan David, you agree with Ryan?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's true. I mean, I think for us too, the part of like the cinematic experience that's most valuable, or that we're most interested in, is the part that's kind of unspeakable, that happens when you see something or experience something with your whole body in a space. And what happens is not, you don't need categories to kind of describe that, and it can happen with any kind of film. I mean, that, you know, people usually then say you have to see that, or you have to go to that thing, and it's like, why? Well, you just have to go do it. You know, that's part of what we like, is the fact that it allows for something like that. So yeah, all the other stuff is part of the game, right? Like you kind of play the game and say, oh yeah, I'm getting funding. This film is an experimental documentary. This film is an essay. This film is all this stuff, and that all comes after. But if the thing kind of works, it's doing other things under all that stuff. That's kind of what we were looking for. And yeah, and that's where like the connection comes, the communion and the joy, like Ryan was saying, the thing where you're like, okay, now something is happening. But yeah, I mean, yeah, we also play the game here and try to get funding, and we had some funding for this film. And in the same way, we also kind of, how we proposed the film was very different than what it actually ended up being. And that's also part of the game, how you kind of tell people, imagine this, because you can't imagine what is not there yet. So you kind of, it's like a different portrait of something. But yeah.
Richard, would you like to?
If you don't mind me shifting, I had this funny thing. So I just watched your films, both your films, and come out very recently. So they're very fresh in my mind. This is a weird thing. I don't know. I feel like there's a metaphor, and I don't know what it is, from Juan's film, which there were these. One thing I found fascinating, it's just running through my head, so this is very stream of consciousness, is when the sculptor is doing is creating a version of the I forgot the name. What's it called again?
Our Rocks.
When he's doing that version in the studio, as he's putting it together, as he's like playing with the clay and doing the eye, it looks so alive. And then when he goes to bring it out, when it's finished and he brings it out into the forest to take pictures, it suddenly looks really artificial. And I remember I was so grabbed by that contrast of those two moments in the film. And I don't know why, I just started thinking about that as we were talking about these issues of how we're presenting our films in order to get funding versus what they'll be. I don't know. Maybe it's a crazy jump, but it just came through my head in a strange sort of way. That association of what we think something will be, what it is in the process of its creation, what it looks like in a different context, and how it seems to change simply by changing its context.
Yeah,
I have no
I
idea.
mean, I would just say that, no, I definitely agree. I think like that's why it's also speaking about a film is a little bit what it does something else than what the film is doing. So in a way, whatever the film is doing is not what we, at least for us, it's not what we intended, and it's not really for us to decide. Like Ryan had said, it lives its own life, and very quickly, even before it's finished, probably it's already doing other things and going on to other places. So yeah, it's fun to, at least for us, it's fun to see other people also that work in these kind of spaces that are not exactly the same as ours. But I mean, like in our film, we also went to see Marlene. She's a cattle expert, but she's also an artist, and she paints cattle. That's all she paints. She only paints cows, but she wrote an encyclopedia about cattle. So in this idea, this multidisciplinary thing where it's a person that's hard to categorize, but her experience is very unique in that way. Or Remy, the sculptor, he was trained as an artist, but then became an expert in creating animal models and in restoring. He also restores animal bones. Like Ryan was mentioning the mammoth. He will rebuild the mammoth for museums and stuff like this based on some bones, and then replacing the bones that are missing, and then creating the sort of idea and making it all seem like it fits, which is kind of also some kind of metaphor for a film, because you have the real bones, real fossils mixed in with fake ones, and it all has to seem like one animal at the end, but in the end it's just a kind of put together mess of plastic and glue and bone and sand, but you think you're seeing something coherent, but it's just a bunch of stuff. And I mean, that's what our films are to us when we're making them. It's just a mess of stuff. And then afterwards, somebody will come and say, hey, yeah, I got it. It was this and that and all this. And you're like, what? Okay, sure. Maybe that is some, but you know, it's foreign. It's kind of, yeah.
And now that you said about reimagining something from what it's exists in a way, you know, and create something that we are not sure it will be how it is, I would like to give it a close-up to our conversation. All your films in a way are close to certain relationships of experimental cinema or art, contemporary art, or whatever, but at the same time you're going to the future, like seeing on the horizon, and like giving a tribute to the name of the competition, that it's beyond what it's next. I would like to ask you, whoever, that's probably going to be Richard, who wants to start, what do you think it's coming up next in cinema? I know we have no certainty, but I just would like to know that you are going to be these actors that are going to allow the cinema to keep expanding. So it's whatever you want to say. Please feel free, Richard.
Now I feel obligated. Man, I have to say I'm the dinosaur here. So I mean, ironically, you know, all of what we have now, this digital access, is really just giving me the possibility of working with the filmic material. I mean, I grew up with film. And I've got to say one thing that I'm trying, being older, I'm trying to keep up on new work, and I'm trying to think how to describe this. But the hard thing for me is I feel like a lot of what's come out so far that I've seen hasn't come to a point of realizing, I don't know if we want to call it the promise of what could be digital media. I haven't seen work that's made me go, oh, wow, this is what this medium is capable of. I still feel like it's still a lot of work is, I don't want to be unfair, but working in the shadow of this long history of moving image. And I don't know how much more it's doing, or maybe it's just because I'm a different generation and I don't get it, and I don't know. And for my own work, I find myself thinking, I don't know. I didn't grow up with even the popular media. I'm coming into it, as someone who's already formed in a lot of ways. I would love to. I'm constantly trying to think, is there some way, but I don't want to force something. Is there some way I can move into where things are going? But I have yet to really connect and say, that's interesting.
Okay. So we'll keep up with the tradition. Okay, no, Ryan, would you like to say something?
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question, a tough one. I think, I don't know, maybe I would talk about or think about modes of distribution and audiences, and that seems to be, I mean, what's changed so quickly and so easily just in these last 6 months of pandemic time, how easily we were able to all do this, be online, and how easily passwords to Vimeo links were made available, and like we were all there already. And then it just sort of like we just like flipped this little switch, and then there was immediately this new amount of access. But then I feel like I saw it shut at this, like quickly after, a few months later, festivals started to have geography dictating who could tune in. I don't know, from pressure from distributors or whatever, and to see the sort of flows of power kind of come back into play. And I think there, like, so within the possibility of not being like fixed in cinemas and geographies of cities, there's a lot of exciting possibility. But also I love being in space, and I miss seeing people, and I miss seeing you all, and that we could, like, after this, have a drink and talk like this. These things are like tragic to me that we don't have them right now, while at the same time we're still super connected. But I think, like, those, to me, the question of future includes mobility, access to work, and then kind of the hangover of geographies still kind of at play.
Yeah, the hangover is going to be really hard to. It's going to be a good one. On David.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with everything Ryan said. I think access is a real issue, and we were also kind of yearning for some real life physical experience in the film field, because that was always our main interest, and we were kind of interested in the ways that could be further developed, not shut down as it seems to be happening, or that people say that it will end. I mean, it was already a model that had a lot of problems, things like what Ryan was saying with the power structures built into this whole thing. I mean, I think the very cool thing that's happened with the pandemic and the way that the film world has had to react is that, it kind of shows that all these kind of power structures are kind of an illusion, and they can be shut down really quickly, even if it was for a little second. But it was all fake and made up, and it was just a way for people to preserve some other illusions and other personal myths. But so I think some people have seen that, and hopefully that'll bring other new things. I mean, we're open-minded, and then hopefully, that some real world experimentation comes back, and maybe this whole kind of collapse that's being prognosticated about, like, cinema and like film theater exhibition. I mean, sometimes things need to kind of die off for new things to come around. So maybe something else will happen, I'm sure. I mean, there's so many people that are working in this field and making stuff, and I really doubt that everybody wants to just have like streaming exhibition for the rest of life. I mean, we are social animals, so.
I hope that this new thing, it's not like a virtual party, and things like that. I just hope that it's not that. It's the only thing that I ask of life. But no, but I would like to thank you, the three of you, to joining us and to share the film with the Mexican audience, and to keep putting in question this structures of power that Juan and Ryan just mentioned, because your films in a way are answers to that, and new paths, and an openness to deconstruct these ideas that we have, and to expand our vision, cinema, language, and our personal issues and way of expression. I would like to, before going on, remind the dates of the screenings of your films. And dear Kamal couldn't join us, but he deserves to be announced. His film is going to be screening in Film in Latino for free, 24 hours on the 6th, this Tuesday. Ryan Ferco, look here from the tower. I would like to avoid to pronounce it incorrectly again, so it will be screened on the 8th, Thursday, on Cinemex Alta Vista at 6 p.m. in a short film program, and in Film in Latino all day long the same day. Sorry, Your Name is Europa will be screening on the same day on Cinemex Insurgentes at 3 p.m. and one day before, on Wednesday 7 on Film in Latino. And Richard's film, Todo lo que se olvida, will be screening on Tuesday 6 on Film in Latino, same as Kamal, and on Friday 9 on Cinemex Reforma Casa de Arte at 5 p.m. Thank you so much again for joining us. In 20 minutes, there will be another conversation on the panels with the Argentinian director Matias Piñeiro, that it's in the same competition. Again, thank you so much, guys. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, nice talking to you all.
See you soon, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah.
Yeah.
With actual drinks.
Great meeting you guys and seeing your film.
Yeah, it was nice to meet you all. See you guys again.
Ciao.
Bye.